Nestled in the misty embrace of the Blue Ridge Mountains, there was a parcel of land that had been up for sale for years. Despite its prime location, just off the Blue Ridge Parkway, no one seemed to want it. The land was vast, with towering trees and a serene view of the rolling hills. An old wooden cabin sat on the property, its weathered boards gray and splintered from years of neglect. A rusted sign hung crookedly from a post near the entrance, declaring in faded letters, "For sale, a perfect getaway." But those who ventured onto the land quickly realized that it was far from perfect. The land was always quiet, eerily so. Birds that sang cheerfully in the surrounding woods fell silent as soon as they crossed the boundary. The air was thick with a feeling of unease, as if the land itself was watching, waiting. Visitors who came to see the property reported strange occurrences. Small rocks would inexplicably tumble down the hills, pelting them as they walked. Branches would snap off trees, seemingly by themselves, and land at their feet. And then there were the whispers, soft, sibilant voices that seemed to come from nowhere, yet everywhere at once, hissing a single word, "Leave." Most heeded the warning, their dreams of a mountain retreat quickly forgotten as they fled the cursed ground. But not everyone was so easily deterred. Carl Hampton was a man of logic, a successful businessman who believed in what he could see and touch. The stories of hauntings and restless spirits didn't scare him. If anything, they intrigued him. He had long dreamed of opening a campground, a place where people could come to reconnect with nature and leave the chaos of the city behind. When he saw the listing for the land near the Blue Ridge Parkway, he couldn't believe his luck. The price was unbelievably low for such a prime location. After work one evening, Carl decided to take a look at the property with his wife, Emily, and her two sisters, Clara and June. The sun was beginning to set as they arrived, casting long shadows across the landscape. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The cabin loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the soul of anyone who dared approach. "It's a fixer-upper, that's for sure," Carl said, trying to sound cheerful, but there was an edge to his voice that he couldn't quite hide. He felt it too, the heavy, oppressive feeling that clung to the air like a shroud. The group made their way toward the cabin, curiosity drawing them closer despite the unease gnawing at their stomachs. The front door was padlocked, and a large sign warned against entering due to the building's instability. The cabin had been abandoned for decades, and it was said that no one had lived there since the original owners, a couple named the Fosters, had passed away. As they peered through the grimy windows, they could just make out the faint outlines of old furniture covered in dust. But what caught Emily's eye was an old photograph hanging on the wall above the fireplace. It was a portrait of a couple, their expressions stern and unforgiving, as if the weight of the world rested on their shoulders. Emily felt a chill run down her spine as she looked at the picture, the eyes of the couple seeming to follow her every move. "Who do you think they are?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Probably the original owners," June replied, but there was a tremor in her voice. "They don't look very friendly, do they?" Carl tried to laugh it off. "Just an old photograph. Nothing to worry about." But as the words left his mouth, the whispers began. "Leave." The sound was faint at first, just a breath on the wind, but it quickly grew louder, more insistent. "Leave. Leave this place." Emily gasped and took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" Clara and June nodded, their faces pale. Carl frowned, trying to rationalize what they were hearing. "It's just the wind," he said, though even he didn't believe it. "But the wind doesn't speak in voices, and it doesn't tell you to leave." Suddenly, a small rock flew out of nowhere, striking Carl on the shoulder. He spun around, but there was no one there. Then another rock came, this one hitting June on the arm. Panic set in as more stones began to pelt them, coming from all directions. "We need to go," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Now." They turned to leave, but as they did, something caught Clara's eye. Two figures stood in the window of the cabin, their faces pressed against the glass. It was the couple from the photograph, their expressions twisted into grotesque masks of rage and sorrow. Their eyes burned with a malevolent fire as they watched the intruders on their land. "Go! Go!" Clara screamed, and they ran. As they fled down the overgrown path, the whispers followed them, growing louder and more frenzied. "Leave! Leave! Leave!" By the time they reached their car, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and darkness had swallowed the land. The air was cold, and the whispers had faded, but the fear lingered. They drove in silence, the image of the ghostly couple burned into their minds. No one spoke of what they had seen, but there was an unspoken understanding among them: the land was cursed, and it would never be theirs. The next day, Carl called the real estate agent and withdrew his offer. The agent didn't seem surprised. "That land's been on the market for years," he said. "No one ever buys it. Always something scares them off. I suppose the Fosters aren't ready to let go." Despite the eerie tales that surrounded the land, the Foster children, desperate to turn a profit on the inherited property, came up with a new plan. They decided to transform the land into a glamping destination, a luxurious camping experience that would draw nature lovers to the Blue Ridge Parkway. With a series of cozy yurts strategically placed to offer stunning mountain views, clear night skies, and even a rare chance to glimpse the northern lights, the Fosters believed they had found the perfect solution to their problem. The yurts were impeccably designed, each one featuring plush king-sized beds, soft linens, and rustic decor that blended perfectly with the natural surroundings. A central fire pit offered a place for guests to gather and share stories while roasting marshmallows under the stars. The Fosters were certain that their new venture would be a hit, and soon after opening, bookings poured in. Among those eager to experience the beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains was the Hayes family: Mark, his wife Lisa, and their 6-year-old son, Ethan. They had been searching for a peaceful getaway, a place to relax and reconnect as a family over the Labor Day weekend. The glamping site seemed perfect, serene, secluded, and far from the stresses of everyday life. They arrived in the late afternoon, the sun casting a golden hue over the mountains as they settled into their yurt. The view was breathtaking, the air crisp and clean. Ethan immediately ran off to explore the area around their yurt, laughing with the pure joy of a child in nature. Mark and Lisa exchanged relieved smiles, happy to see their son so carefree. That night, after a hearty dinner cooked over the fire pit, the family retired to their yurt. Ethan, tired from the day's adventures, fell asleep almost instantly in his own cozy little bed. Mark and Lisa lay down in the large king-sized bed, the sounds of the night, a distant owl, the rustling of leaves, lulling them into a peaceful slumber. But their peace did not last. Sometime in the deep of night, Mark woke with a start. A heavy pressure weighed down on his chest, making it impossible to breathe. His eyes flew open, but there was nothing there, nothing visible, at least. He tried to move, but his limbs were paralyzed as if something invisible held him in place. Panic surged through him as he fought for air, his heart hammering in his chest. Just when he thought he would pass out, the pressure suddenly lifted, leaving him gasping for breath. Before he could recover, Lisa stirred beside him. He turned to her, relief flooding him, but then her body tensed, and a strangled gasp escaped her lips. She clawed at her throat, her eyes wide with terror as she experienced the same crushing weight that had just tormented Mark. He reached out to her, but before he could do anything, the invisible force released her as well. "What the hell was that?" Mark whispered, his voice shaking. "I don't know," Lisa replied, her voice trembling. "But it felt like something was on me." They sat in the darkness, too scared to speak, their hearts pounding in unison. The yurt, once a haven of warmth and comfort, now felt like a prison. Suddenly, Ethan's scream pierced the night, shattering the silence. The couple jumped up and rushed to their son's bed, finding him sitting up, his little face streaked with tears, eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Lisa asked, trying to keep her voice calm despite the terror still coursing through her. I saw them. Ethan sobbed. The scary people. They were standing right there. He pointed to the corner of the yurt, but when Mark and Lisa looked, there was nothing. Mark held Ethan close, trying to soothe him, but the boy continued to cry, his small body trembling. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he fell back into a fitful sleep. Mark and Lisa, however, stayed awake, too frightened to close their eyes, the memory of the crushing weight and their son's fear too fresh in their minds. The next day, they tried to shake off the events of the night, convincing themselves it had all been a bad dream. They spent the day exploring the mountains, trying to enjoy the beauty that surrounded them. But an unease lingered, a sense that they were being watched, that something malevolent lurked just beyond the edge of their vision. When night fell again, they hesitated to go to bed, but exhaustion eventually won out. They climbed into the king-sized bed, holding each other close, hoping for a peaceful night. But peace was not to be found. In the dead of night, the temperature in the yurt plummeted, their breaths coming out in visible puffs of air. The oppressive weight returned, first pressing down on Mark, then on Lisa, as if the very air was being sucked from their lungs. They heard whispers, those same, insidious whispers that had driven others from the land, telling them to leave, to get out before it was too late. And then came the screams. Ethan's cries were loud and panicked, but this time, he wasn't just frightened. When Mark and Lisa rushed to his side, they saw scratches on his arms, as if someone, or something, had clawed at him in the dark. That was the final straw. Mark and Lisa hurriedly packed their bags, scooping up their terrified son and leaving the yurt in the dead of night. The once idyllic retreat had turned into a nightmare, and they knew they couldn't stay another night. As they drove away, the dark road illuminated only by their headlights, they glanced back at the property. For a brief moment, they saw them, two figures standing in the doorway of the yurt, their faces twisted with anger, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the couple from the photograph in the old cabin, the same spirits that had haunted the land for years. They didn't stop until they were miles away, the haunted land fading into the distance behind them. After the Hayes family fled, word of their terrifying experience spread. Other visitors came and went, each one leaving with their own tale of terror. The glamping site quickly gained a reputation as a cursed place, and bookings plummeted. Soon, the Fosters had no choice but to shut down the operation, the land once again left vacant, shunned by all who knew of its dark history. The yurts now sit empty, abandoned like the old cabin that still stands as a grim reminder of the land's cursed past. No one dares set foot there anymore, not after what has happened. The spirits of Mr. and Mrs. Foster have made it clear that they will not allow anyone to claim what they believe is rightfully theirs. The land, once so full of promise, remains in the grip of the restless dead, untouched and forsaken. And so, it waits, silent, brooding, and haunted, its dark secrets buried beneath the earth, whispering to anyone who dares come near, warning them to stay away or face the wrath of the spirits that dwell within.